Okay, hi everyone. I haven't said hi to yet. Um, I just want to go to our ARC page before we start with the slides for tonight. I did send this out in an announcement earlier, but I just want to show you where to find it in case the links don't work. For some reason, ARC is not behaving its best lately, and so just in case it doesn't work, I want to show you what's in the learning units. So in each learning unit, right at the end, there's a short video. It's like between 4 and 5 minutes that quickly summarizes summarizes the whole learning unit. Okay, it is AI generated, but I've checked all of the videos, and it's used my content to make the videos. And it's done them really, really nicely. So even if you kind of like low in motivation, and you think, okay, I'm not ready to dive into this learning unit yet, you could even start with the video first, just to get a broad overview of what the learning unit is about. Okay, there's the one from learning unit 2, and then learning unit 3. There it is there. Okay, so you'll see I've only added these things in today. So if you haven't been on ARC today, this will be new to you. There's a couple of bits and pieces that I've added in here, just for the first 3 learning units for now. Yeah, just to help you along with some of the content. I still want to build something in here about hypotheses. I'll do that next week, but you're not going to be tested on it, so I haven't really focused too much on it. The different types of research, that's one of the potential questions you could get. I loaded a recording about that yesterday, but here's also some sort of interactive stuff that you can have a look at as well to help you. Okay. What did I put in here? Not too much. Okay, that's fine. But there's recordings on that. Okay. Oh, sorry, you don't want to read all my boring messages. Let's just close that. Okay. All right, so you can go and dig around in ARC, but the recordings, like I said, either the live sessions or the recording, well, both have been dealing with exam questions from that exam brief. Okay, so they're all here. Sometimes, I don't know why this happens. Sometimes the link breaks, but if you just subscribe to the channel, you'll be able to see all of these. Okay, so I tried to embed them here, and sometimes they show up and sometimes they don't. Like, there we go. That one, for some reason, is showing up and others aren't. But in any case, what may be easier is for you to just subscribe to the channel, and then you'll see everything that I post. Okay. Right, what are we doing tonight? Tonight, we are doing, we're covering some content on literature reviews. So, and the reason this is a live session, and then there's also an additional recording on conceptualization, because one of the potential exam questions that you may be asked is specifically related to literature reviews and the conceptualization that goes into them. Yes, Mavis, you can go ahead.
Tracy, I think you forgot to share your screen.
I did. Sorry. Oh, so I'm telling you all about the stuff in ARC and you couldn't even see. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
And then I wasn't watching the chat. So sorry, guys. Thank you for telling me. Okay, sorry. So let me show you. Right, learning unit 1. If you scroll down, there's the video summary there. Okay, learning unit 2, you just click on the folder. Don't go into the themes. Just scroll to the end. Where's it now? Oh, did I go and put it in the theme? I bet you I did. Not that one. Oh, because it's at the end of the themes. There it is. There were 3 themes. Learning unit 3. Scroll. There's the video there. Okay, so it's embedded. The summary videos are embedded in the content folders. The recordings from the live sessions and the additional recordings I've done are in this folder at the top called recordings. Here's the live sessions. Here's the additional recordings. Okay, so you're probably wondering, what on earth was she talking about when I was saying sometimes it's broken? See, sometimes they don't show up for some reason. And then it does that. I don't know why. And now that one's broken. It was working just now. But you get one to work, then at least you've got the link to my YouTube channel. That one works now for some reason. Okay. And everything I load goes into the same YouTube channel. Okay. So now that I'm actually sharing my screen and you can see what I'm doing, let's hop over to the literature review. Okay, so to orientate you, this is theme 1 from Learning Unit 3, and it's chapter 8. The other theme from Learning Unit 3 is conceptualization, and that I've captured as a recording. That is in the recordings folder. Okay, so basically by the end of this session tonight, we would have finished Learning Unit 3. So if you're playing catch-up, by the end of the weekend, if that's when you're doing your catch-up, Learning Unit 3 is where you want to be. And then we dive into Learning Unit 4 next week. I think we've got 3 sessions next week together. And we'll finish most of the content next week, either through live sessions or through through both, through the live sessions and through the recordings. Okay, so the thing about a literature review. So a literature review is exactly that. It is your opportunity to review the literature. And the literature is the journal articles that exist in the topic that you are studying. It is the books that have been published. It is the websites that pertain to your topic. Conference proceedings could also be part of that. It's the published literature that has been peer reviewed that you want to now survey and review and critically synthesize. Okay, that's really what the literature review is. Sometimes, depending on what you are doing, you can also include something called gray literature, which is like websites and blogs and policies and things like that. You know, obviously you don't want to include like Reddit posts in a literature review, okay? But sometimes important stuff is put on websites and on, I mean, I'm just thinking about a paper I wrote recently that included gray literature, and the gray literature I included was so I was writing a paper on service learning, and a lot of the universities were publishing what they are doing in their service learning programs on their websites, but they hadn't published it yet. But I still really wanted to include those projects in the literature review. It was important for me to do, and so that was an example of gray literature. It wasn't peer-reviewed, published research in a journal, but it was, you know, still accessible and still something that was worth putting into the literature review. At your level, I would recommend, you know, being cautious about gray literature. And if you're going to include it, talk to your supervisor first. Okay. So, I love this little quote, and this is what I always remind myself of when I'm doing a literature review, because sometimes you're like, okay, I've got to get this done. Let's get it done. That's the wrong attitude to have with a literature review. The attitude to have with a literature review is sometimes you have to go slow in order to go fast. A literature review is a tedious drafting process. I love writing literature reviews. I've just called it tedious, but it's a really fulfilling exercise because you really get your hands dirty in the literature. So before we go into too much depth about what a literature review is and how to do it, I want to just frame your thinking, and I want to prompt you to think of the literature review, as a process, not a product. Of course, you're going to have a product at the end, but don't be focused on the product. Focus on the process. Because the reality is, at honors level, you are not going to read everything related to your field, not at honors level. At PhD level, you are expected to have read everything published in your field. which is quite tricky when things are being published every week. And so you finish your literature review, and then 6 months later, you're ready to submit. Actually, no, you're not, because there's new stuff that's been published, and best you go back and include that in your literature review. You don't have to go through that, luckily. You need to have a fairly good grasp of the field. You need to know who your seminal authors are. Who are the top dogs in your field? Who are the people that everyone in your topic area are citing? You need to demonstrate to your reader, your examiner, that you know who those people are and that you know how to synthesize research in order to make a sound argument. Okay. So the thing about literature reviews, and you'll get there when you write yours, you are not going to get it right the first time. So the first time you write a literature review, you're going to hand in a draft to your supervisor. Please do not expect your supervisor to come back and say, this is great, don't make any changes. It's very, very unlikely. The way you learn to write a literature review is by scrabbling something together with some of the advice that we're going to give you. Have a go at it, and then you're going to draft and redraft and redraft. Okay, and that's a very normal part of the process. So if you get feedback from your supervisor after your first draft and it's just comments everywhere and you think, oh, hell, I really screwed this up. No, you didn't. That's what a first draft is supposed to look like. Okay, it's a process. So what is a literature review actually? A literature review is a written argument, and that's really important. It is an argument, okay? You're not writing an essay, okay? You're not summarizing the things that you found. So you're not saying, Smith et al. Found this, and you write a whole paragraph about Smith et al. Then in your next paragraph, you start citing Brown et al. And then you tell me everything that paper. You're not summarizing things, okay? You're synthesizing things. Now, sometimes the first draft starts out as a summary. Okay, it's not going to end there though, and I'm going to show you how to move from summary to synthesis. So there's a nice quote there from Matchy and McAvoy from 2011. They said that a literature review is a written argument that promotes a thesis position. So a thesis just means argument, okay? By building a case from credible evidence based on previous research. So a literature review is not just you telling your reader, here's everything I know about the topic so far, and now here's what I'm going to do. You say, here's what we know about the topic so far, but here's a gap, or here's a limitation. Okay, so your literature review, the central argument in your literature review needs to be that here's what we know about the state of the field, but there's also stuff we don't know. And then you pinpoint that. Okay. You provide a critical analysis of the papers that you are reviewing in your literature review with the view that you are making an argument. Okay, so don't forget the argument part of it. The literature review is hard to do because it's a brand new task. You've not had to do something like this before. It's not alone a critical analysis. It's not an essay. It's not a discussion. It's an argument that you're building. Okay. You might think, well, what does that even look like? My advice to you is actually to go and look at as many different examples of literature reviews as you can. There's repositories on the library. You can go and see what past students have written in their literature reviews. That's a nice place to start. If you think, okay, I just need to understand what this thing looks like. Go and have a look at past projects and see what their literature reviews look like. I don't know why that cut off there on the left, I'm sorry, but it's supposed to say context of current knowledge. So your literature review provides the context and the background about the current knowledge of the topic and lays out a logical case to defend the thesis position taken. So we're not just throwing out all this literature, we are also pointing out where there are similarities, where there are tensions in the field, where do people disagree, why do they disagree, and then you can comment on what you found. What you may find is that much of the literature published is coming from the global north, and there's very little being published out of the global south. Comment on that. Why is that a problem? What's different about the global south and the global north? And that will just require a little bit of reading for you to get your head around that. Okay, so in terms of theories, methods, and gaps, a literature review is a survey of scholarly sources on a specific topic. It provides an overview of current knowledge, allowing you to identify relevant theories, methods, and gaps in the existing research. Okay. It's a journey, really, that you take your reader on from start to finish, and it does require pretty careful signposting on your part to tell the reader, right, we are departing from here. Here's where we are going and why. Here's the steps we're going to take along the way to get there. Okay. So let's just talk a bit more about that argument part of it. So I've told you already that the literature review is essentially an argument that you are making. It's not an essay that you're writing, just summarizing some things that you found about the field. And very importantly, okay, wait, before I get there, let's do this. The aim of the literature review is to show what has been done in the field in order to make an argument that your research is necessary. Okay, so you need to be pointing out the gaps. And that is the argument that you are making, that there is a gap in this field. But you can't just say that there's a gap in the field. You've got to prove it by reviewing the evidence out there and then critiquing and analyzing that evidence to show that there is a gap. You've got to prove it, convince your reader. Okay. Now, very importantly, I see this so often in literature reviews. So I'm telling you right at the outset that you don't make the same mistake. You are not trying to answer your research questions in the literature review. Why? Because if you can answer your research questions, then what's the point of doing your research? The point of your literature review is to show why your research questions are even valid in the first place. Okay. So by the time you get to the end of your literature review, you have developed an argument around the gap in the literature in such a sophisticated way that you can now say, right, here are the questions we are left with. And you then turn those into research questions. Okay. Please be careful. Do not answer your research questions in the literature review. Okay. It's very easy to fall into that trap. So just be careful of that. So the core argument that you're wanting to make, there is a gap. Here's how I know, and it needs to be filled. Here's why. That's your core argument. And then just, complete the sentence based on your topic. Okay. Anyone played this game before? Does it look familiar? Ludo. Anyone played it? Yes? No?
I personally haven't not.
Okie dokes. I'll explain it to you now. You recognize it but haven't played it. Okay. So let me explain to you how Cluedo works. And just bear with me. Okay. I know this is not a board game lecture, but I'm going somewhere with this. So in the game of Cluedo, what happens is something has happened. There has been a murder in this mansion. So on the board, this is a mansion. Okay, there's the garage, there's the games room. That looks like a bedroom. There's the bathroom. There's the dining room, the kitchen. Okay. So a murder happens in the house. Somebody has committed the murder, one of these people, and they've all got fancy names. So I can't remember that one. This is Professor Plum, Peacock, someone Peacock, Mrs. Peacock, I think. Green was Mr. Green. Miss Scarlet, the yellow one. Colonel Mustard was the yellow one. I can't remember the white one. If anyone knows this game, please help me. It's going to drive me mad. Okay, so one of them has committed the murder, and they've committed the murder with one of these murder weapons. There's a candlestick, a dagger, a rope, whatever. There's a whole bunch of weapons. Okay, in the middle of the board is the answer. Who did it, in what room, with what weapon? Okay, so the game is each player in the game gets one of these pieces of paper. And on the pieces of paper, what you do is you collect the clues of what we know. Okay, so these things are the clues here. So I think every player gets like, I don't know how many clues. You take your clues and you pop them down onto the piece of paper here. Okay, stick with me. I promise you there's a point to this. So what you then do is you go around the board and you collect clues as you go. So you would roll the dice and you go into a particular room and then you can pick up a card, whatever. And along the way, you are trying to basically, by a process of elimination, figure out, okay, it couldn't have been Professor Plum, but it could still be one of the others. And eventually you go through so many processes of elimination that you can figure out who it was. But along the way, you can also share clues with other players. Okay. And with the ultimate goal of finding out who did it with what weapon in what room. So the analogy that I like to make here with Cluedo is that why do we have to do a literature review at all? Why can't we just go ahead and do this research because it's interesting? And this is an important question. Because it's kind of like if you joined a game of Cluedo 30 minutes into the game, when a whole bunch of people have already collected clues. They don't know the answer yet, but they've all collected a number of clues already. They know a lot of stuff that you don't know. So if you barge into the game now, 30 minutes late, and start saying, well, why aren't we investigating Professor Plum? I mean, that's a really important question. Could it be Professor Plum? Imagine how silly you would look making that kind of accusation or asking that question when the other players who've been around for a while, okay, there's the analogy, the other researchers who have been around for a while, have been playing this game for a while, have collected the necessary clues. They already know it's not Professor Plum. They ruled that out 20 years ago, okay, in a study done in Canada, whatever. So that is why it is important to do a literature review. You've got to say, right, I'm entering the field now. I'm entering this game for the first time. I know there are other players. Here are the other important players, and here's what they have found so far. Here's where they agree. Here's where they disagree. But here's what they still don't know. And so that's the question I'm going to ask, and that's the question I'm going to answer. And that is the contribution I make to this field. It's the contribution I make to this game of Cluedo. Research is a little bit like a game of Cluedo. Okay. So if you feel like convincing yourself this weekend that you're working really hard and doing homework, go and buy yourself the game of Cluedo and force your family and friends to play with you. And you can call it homework. Okay. Endorsed by Tracy. You're welcome. Does the analogy make sense?
Yes, absolutely. It's a perfect analogy for me.
Okay, great. Great. Okay, so I've said to you that your argument is about identifying gaps. So you might be wondering, okay, well, what kind of gap can I identify? And when you're reading, you might be thinking, oh, I can't see a gap. And that's because there can be different kinds of gaps. So keep your mind open, keep your eyes open to these different gaps. Okay, the one could be a methodological gap. So you could see that when you're reviewing the literature, that most of the studies done in this area have been done with a quantitative methodology, and there's very little qualitative research in this area. Or maybe it's vice versa. Maybe there's an opportunity to do mixed methods research. you might find some flaws in design, maybe even in sample size. And so that's something that you could contribute to. That is a gap that you could identify. It doesn't necessarily have to be that, we don't yet know what something is. That would be a conceptual gap. And sometimes if you are working in a field that has been extensively studied and, there's a lot of people who have been researching this for a long time, you might not at this stage of the game want to identify a conceptual gap. Perhaps right now, a methodological gap is an easier one to work with. You could also have a contextual gap, which would talk to the geographical or organizational gap. So what that means is you may notice in your research that much of the research that has been done is coming out of the United States or Britain or Europe. And there's not really that much coming out of South Africa. And that's quite a common problem to find. So keep an eye out for that kind of gap as well. It could also be an organizational gap in that perhaps we know how something works. Let's say AI. We know how AI is working in, let's say, the automotive sector. I'm really making this up because I haven't done the reading. There's lots being published there, but there hasn't yet been much published around AI in the educational sector. Okay, that's a lie, by the way. Lots has been published, but I'm just showing you how there could be gaps in different sectors. And in fact, that paper I was telling you about just now that included some grey literature, I was interested in how AI is being used in service learning programs across the world, because we know a lot about how AI is being used in higher education. Loads has been written about that. But there's a contextual gap with regards to service learning specifically. And it was actually shocking how big that gap was once I really dug deep into the literature. There was a gaping hole. And that's quite exciting to find as a researcher, because it means that my research then becomes more relevant. Okay. You don't have to find massive gaping holes. Okay. Even if somebody has already done something similar to what you are thinking of doing, you can still contribute to that. Okay, because one study is not necessarily enough to fill a gap. And so you can contribute and work off the back of somebody else's study and contribute some more data to that. So a conceptual gap is the obvious one, where perhaps it's a new area or there are no clear definitions yet. That would be a conceptual gap that you could identify. Okay, so the purpose of doing the literature review, I've explained it to you by way of analogy that you can't just walk into this conversation, because that's what's happening. There's a conversation happening about your topic. That's happening in journals, in conferences, in books. There's an ongoing conversation happening, and you are new to the conversation. You are joining the conversation. So what's the smartest way to join that conversation? Question. Go in curiously and question. The purpose of the literature review is to question the state of knowledge. What do you guys know? What clues have you guys already found about this topic? Cool. I'm going to then synthesize all your clues together so that I can figure out what do we not yet know yet, so that I know where we go from here. Okay. Because if I can question the state of knowledge about a topic, I can then define an area for new research. And that is the purpose. So you do this by producing an argument, by producing a position on the state of knowledge. You don't just present a summary of all the research that has been done. You do that, but you also take a position on that summary. What does all of this mean? Don't leave it up to your reader to decide what it means. It's your job to tell them what it all means. Okay. And you've got to synthesize. rather than summarize. So tell the reader what you want them to think after reading your synthesis of the existing literature. What does all of this mean? Oh, okay. I don't, half the slide is missing. I think it said some hacks. It was supposed to say start with an annotated bibliography. I don't know what's happening to this Canva tonight. Okay, so I'm going to show you where I recommend you start to develop your arguments. Start with an annotated bibliography. I'm going to tell you what that is in a moment. Okay. Right, let's do that, then I'll come back to this. So this is an example of an annotated bibliography that I started. So what I've done here, move this thing out the way. I put in the provisional title that I was working with. This is kind of what I wanted to do. These were sort of some of my ideas. So this was a working title, but you can see it's far too long. So, I mean, I left it as is, but I still need to refine it. And these are just some notes for myself. This is what I'm interested in, what I'm looking for. No one's ever going to see your annotated bibliography. Okay, this is for you, which is why I could make it pink. Okay, because it's just for me. What I did was I made a table, and then as I read a paper, I would put in who are the authors, when did they publish this? Because another gap you might find is that all the research is really, really old and we have nothing up to date. That's a gap you might find. I put the title of the paper there. What methodology did they use? What were the key takeaways and findings? And what was the gap that was left? And very honestly, the authors of papers will quite transparently tell you what the limitations of their research were. And so that is the gap right there. And then I put some of my thoughts down because these thoughts eventually become how I structure my literature review. What I started to do then, once I'd done enough, so I'm just showing you, this is just a screenshot of it, but eventually, I don't know how many I had here, probably 30, 40 papers in here. I then started to highlight in the same colors some of the common themes that were coming out. And so eventually when I wrote my paper, all of the yellow themes were clustered together as one paragraph, and those themes were spread out over a couple of papers. All of the green themes would have become one paragraph or one subheading. All of the blue highlights would have become one theme under one subheading. So what I'm trying to show you is that you don't make this row one paragraph, then here's the next paragraph, the next row. You organize your literature review by themes that are coming out of the literature that you have reviewed. And for me, this is a really systematic way of doing that. So you don't have to do this. You never have to submit your annotated bibliography to anybody. But this is my suggestion to you to get the process started so that you can be systematic about what you are finding. Okay, so this is kind of what it looks like. Let's just go back here. So my suggestion is when that annotated bibliography, that's what AB stands for, when that annotated bibliography is complete, then go ahead and look for patterns and themes in the literature that you have read. And that's when I take a highlighter and I start, okay, all these things I'm highlighting in yellow are kind of similar themes that are coming out. Then there's stuff in green, there's stuff in blue. Then also find out what is the gap. And that's why I had a whole column for what is the gap still and where am I going to come in? Because you can't fill the entire gap and all of the gaps that you find. You decide which gap is it that you are going to be able to realistically address in your honors year. So you look for patterns. No, I'm on the wrong one. What is the gap? How is your research going to be positioned against the themes or gaps? Then you go back to the beginning. How did you get there? What are the stops along the way that your reader needs to make in order to understand where your research fits in to all of the research that you have reviewed? And that is where I was talking earlier about the signposting that you do along the way. Okay. Right. So, as I'm reading my literature and I'm filling out my annotated bibliography, I can start to see particular themes. So these were the themes I started to see out of my annotated bibliography. Okay. Obviously the title of these themes doesn't matter to you, but I'm just showing you how I labeled them so you can kind of see what your subheadings would look like in your literature review. Okay. Then the important part, once you have done your annotated bibliography, you've identified your themes, you've started to write a little bit of a narrative around all of those themes, you get to the point where you go, right, what do each of these themes contribute to my overall argument that I'm making here? And I suppose a bullet point that should have come first here is to go, right, very clearly, now what is my argument? What am I actually going to say in this literature review? Because that argument should be signposted in your introduction paragraph. Because the thing about a literature review is it's not a suspense novel. Okay, so don't wait till the end to drop the bomb and to say, well, here is my argument. There shouldn't be suspense in your literature review. You should tell your reader up front, this is where we're going. We're going on a road trip together. This is where we're going. These are the stops we're making along the way and why. And now here we go. Now we're going to start the journey. Okay. So then it requires you to then think, what do each of these themes contribute to your overall argument? And then think, is each theme relevant in helping the reader understand the context of your research? Or has one of these themes perhaps taken you on a bit of a detour? And it's really, really easy to take a detour by accident in your literature review. And I said this one year to my honors students and they laughed at me, but it's true. The literature can bully you. It is easy to be bullied by the literature because you get sucked down into the rabbit holes and you want to write about everything, and it's so easy to be swayed off course. Keep your core argument in mind. Remember the research problem that you are setting out to investigate. And make sure that each theme that you have included in your literature review is relevant in helping your reader understand the context of your research and in investigating the problem that that you have stated you're going to investigate. Realize I haven't been watching the chat. Sorry, let me go back and see. No questions yet. Okay. Right. And then importantly, you need to tell your reader pretty consistently, where does your research fit into the research that you have just organized and synthesized? Don't let them guess. It's not up to your reader to figure it out. It's up to you to tell them. Okay. And to go back to the analogy of Cluedo, you can think about your argument in these terms. What clues do you hope to be able to offer the other players in the game so that the game can progress? The only thing about this analogy is that you can finish a game of Cluedo and you can find out the answer. You never really finish the game of research. We never really find the answer. We just keep sharing clues until we get bored of it, really. Okay, but we don't ever get to see the card in the middle, unfortunately. In terms of structuring the literature review, you're going to come up with a lot of different themes, and then you might think, okay, what must go first? Does it matter what goes first? Yes, it does matter what goes first. Your literature review should follow a funnel structure in that you start out with the more broad themes, and then you get more and more focused as you get to the point. And the point of the funnel right at the bottom is where your research comes in. You get closer and closer and closer to the context of your particular topic. So by the end of the literature review, it becomes so obvious why your research questions are so important to ask. The last piece of the funnel, the very last thing that you write about, is actually the most important part of your literature review, and that is your conclusion paragraph. It is so important in closing the loop and making it very clear what you want the reader to walk away remembering. Remember that it's the very last thing they're going to read before they read your research questions. So in the conclusion paragraph, you want to be explicitly clear about what your argument is that you have made within your literature review. And make sure that in this conclusion paragraph, you are also making a very clear link back to the research problem, because that's going to give the reader a really good sense on why you took them on this road trip with you through all of this literature. It needed to have served a purpose in terms of progressing the research project. Okay, because I can't click any further, I'm going to assume that that is my last slide. Let's see. Yes, it is. Okay, questions, comments, concerns? Shall we have a look at the exam question? All right, we've done that one. That was a live session. We've done that one. That was a recording. Aims of research, that's a recording. Right. So this is what we were focusing on tonight. The literature review is an important element included in the research proposal and the research project, by the way, which is expanded upon in the research report. Okay, there it is. Among other things, this review of existing literature provides the researcher an opportunity to conceptualize key terminology on which the research will be based. So that would be one of your broader themes sort of earlier on in the literature review, is the conceptualization of key terminology. So the question then asks you to explain the purpose of the literature review, which is what we covered tonight. Okay, so that comes from this recording. And the conceptualization of key terms within the research process. Okay, and there's so much you could say about these two things. For 15 marks. Okay. When you are answering these questions, please keep that mark allocation in mind. Some of them, like this first one, was quite a bit bigger for 40 marks because there's just so much that you can say. And that's why this was done over 2 recordings as well. So you would obviously write a lot more for this question than you would for a 15-mark question. Okay. So what I've presented here tonight and what is in the conceptualization recording will be more than sufficient to cover this. Okay, so when you are prepping for the exams, I would, and even start now, don't leave it to right before the exam. If I were you, go ahead and practice actually answering this question. Okay. And what you can do is you can even give the question and your answer to ChatGPT and ask it to give you feedback. Ask it to mark it for you. Say, this is out of 15 marks. What mark would you give me? What did I leave out? Okay. Nothing wrong with doing that to help you prepare. So the other questions that are coming up, population and sampling, we're going to do that on Tuesday. All right, this is another question on population and sampling. Okay. Difference between qualitative and quantitative. We're going to do this on Wednesday and Thursday. Reliability and validity, that's going to be the following week, I think. Okay, so like I say, each of these questions we're going to get to in either a live session or a recording. So you should be well prepared by then. Okay. Questions, comments, concerns? We're all happy. Ready to start the weekend. All right. I release you. Let's stop recording. Thank you everyone for joining me tonight.